Nurse Rodriguez apparently thinks her community college training trumps hospital protocol. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before two Black Hawks landed in his parking lot. The fluorescent lights of Seattle General in Savannah hum at 60 Hz, the frequency that makes Katie Rodriguez's old shrapnel wound ache when storms come in from the coast. She's been here 8 months, the invisible night shift nurse who never eats in the cafeteria, who charts vitals with mechanical precision, her handwriting so controlled it looks printed. The scar tissue visible at her collar when she reaches overhead makes the younger nurses whisper. She walks with the slightest hitch in her left leg, muscle memory from carrying weight she shouldn't have been able to carry. In her locker sits a pair of worn combat boots, size 6, the left one still stained dark near the ankle. She touches them every shift before clocking in, a ritual no one sees. The leather is cracked from desert heat and dried blood. The laces are synthetic mil-spec issue, the kind you can tie one-handed in darkness. The boots don't match any story she's ever told. Not once in 8 months has anyone asked about them. Her hands never shake during fours, even the difficult ones. When a patient codes, her movements become fluid as water, sure as a surgeon's. The newer nurses watch her from the corner of their eyes, trying to place what she is. Nurse? Maybe. Something else underneath? Probably. Nobody asks. Dr. Whitfield arrives for his evening rounds at 6:41 p.m., his Italian leather shoes clicking against linoleum like a metronome, like something measuring out the rhythm of ownership. His eyes scan the ER with the predatory patience of a man who owns the space. 43 years old, practice smile, cufflinks made from surgical steel, expensive enough to mean something, cheap enough to claim humility. He's built Seattle General's trauma program into a revenue engine that runs at maximum capacity. 17 months of carefully inflated billing codes. 3 board members in his pocket. 2 hospital administrators who owe him referral kickbacks. The power radiating off him is the kind that comes from knowing exactly where every camera is mounted. The ER doors explode inward. 2 paramedics push a stretcher, a man in his mid-30s, combat uniform soaked dark, bleeding from chest and shoulder. Massive trauma. The paramedic's voice is clipped, professional, Major Marcus Webb, 36 years old, shrapnel wounds from IED, estimated 2 liters blood loss pre-hospital, heart rate 138 and climbing, blood pressure 82/50 and dropping fast. Cardiac tamponade suspected, we got 1 large bore for established in the field, 2 minutes out from arrest. Katie's eyes move from the paramedic's face to the stretcher. The patient's uniform still has the dust of deployment on it. The wounds are clean, calculated, the kind that come from fragmentation. She watches the paramedics work around the body like they're handling something precious that's already breaking. Blood pools under the stretcher wheels. Then she looks at his face. 20 years dissolve in 4 seconds. The adult features don't matter. The scar over his left eyebrow doesn't matter. What matters is the architecture underneath, the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the small chip in the left front tooth from that day in Helmand Province when she pulled him from the burning compound. 8 years old. Terrified. That boy is inside this man's face, and Katie stops breathing. Dr. Whitfield moves forward, his presence making the air pressure change like he's pulled all oxygen into his own gravity. Trauma Bay 3. Rodriguez, you're on intake charting, stay at the desk, get insurance information, anything we need for billing documentation. His voice is smooth, pharmaceutical company cocktail smooth. The rest of you hold. I need to speak with you. He corrals the trauma team in the hallway, his shoulders blocking the doorway so Katie can't see the details. His voice drops, but not enough. This patient came in as special forces. That means military transfer protocols. That means paperwork we don't have. That means insurance might not cover the care, which means this becomes a charity case, which means the Medicare auditors start digging into our billing structure looking for other cases we should have transferred. He pauses. Lets it land. We don't have time for audits. Nobody touches this patient without my explicit order. Nobody. That clear? And Rodriguez, he turns, spots her at the intake desk already moving toward the trauma bay. Not you. You stay where you are. Katie's jaw tightens. One muscle. That's all she allows. I said stay. Whitfield's voice has teeth now. This is above your pay grade. This is above your training. We have attending physicians who'll handle the major. She nods. Once. Her hands don't tremble. Her voice doesn't crack. Understood, doctor. But she watches through the observation window as the trauma team circles the patient. She watches them not move. Watches them wait for orders that don't come. Watches Major Marcus Webb's heart rate climb on the monitor, 140, 145, 152. His blood pressure falls, 80/48, 78/45. The nurses look at each other. Someone reaches for a chest tube kit. Whitfield appears in the trauma bay doorway, shakes his head once. They step back. Katie's hands grip the edge of the intake desk. Her fingernails are short, practical, and her calluses are the kind that come from 15 years of field medicine, not from pushing a pen. The scar running from wrist to elbow on her left arm is thin and precise, the kind a surgeon leaves when they're extracting shrapnel at 3 a.m. in a forward operating base with nothing but flashlight and prayer. The monitor shows Marcus Webb's oxygen saturation dropping. 92, 88, 85, his heart is drowning in fluid, and the room is watching it happen while Dr. Whitfield stands in the doorway like a man protecting a bank vault. Katie stands. Takes one step toward the trauma bay. Her left leg pulls tight, the old injury, the old reminder. Dr. Whitfield's hand catches her arm. Not hard. Precise. The grip of a man who knows exactly how much pressure it takes to get someone's attention. Security will escort you out of this hospital if you go near that room again. Understood? This isn't about your judgment. This is about protocol. This is about your career. His smile is a knife made of teeth. You're a community college nurse, Katie. You don't have the credentials to handle a case this complex. Stay at your desk. She looks at his hand. At his wedding ring, gold, expensive, the kind that says his wife doesn't know about the billing schemes. At the cufflinks. At the face of a man who has convinced himself that paperwork matters more than a heartbeat. Understood. 2 syllables. Steady as a sniper's breathing. He releases her arm and walks back to his office, his shoes clicking away. Katie watches his door close. Counts to 30. 31. 32. She returns to the intake desk and opens the patient file that's been digitally transmitted from the field medics. Name, Major Marcus Webb, United States Army Special Forces, attached to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. Home address, Portland, Oregon. Medical history, minor laceration age 8, treated and released at a military field hospital in Afghanistan, cause listed as evacuation injuries. The note is classified. Redacted. Unsigned. It has no name. No date that makes sense. No record of who treated him. Except Katie knows exactly who treated him. She was 24 years old. She was carrying a tactical rifle and a field medical pack. She was running through Sanjin Valley with shrapnel in her own left leg and a boy in her arms who weighed 62 pounds and wouldn't stop crying. The monitor in Trauma Bay 3 flatlines. 3 seconds of silence. Just the ventilator. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then the alarm screams, and someone is bagging the patient manually, and the heart monitor shows nothing, nothing, nothing. Katie's eyes move from the monitor to Whitfield's closed office door. Back to the monitor. Back to the door. She'd buried this life 20 years ago. Had become invisible. Had let the CIA redact her records and the Pentagon deny her service and 3 congressmen claim they'd never heard of her. She'd accepted the silence as the price of staying alive. But that was before she walked into Seattle General and found an 8-year-old boy in a 36-year-old's body dying while a man with leather shoes protected his billing codes instead of a human life. The monitor flatlines again. The room is frantic now, chest compressions, medications pushed, the ordered chaos of people trying to save someone they've been ordered to let die. Katie stands. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is steady. Every scar on her body is screaming, but her voice stays flat, professional. I'm going on break. She walks toward the back of the hospital where the supply closets live. Where nobody is watching. Where the night shift doesn't have cameras because nobody thought anyone would steal surgical equipment from a hospital in Savannah. The combat boots in her locker have carried her through 2 decades of disappearing. They're about to carry her through something else entirely. The fluorescent lights hummed their surgical hum as conference room B filled with residents, 20 of them arranged in tiered seating like an amphitheater designed to amplify shame. Dr. Whitfield stood at the podium, his suit pressed to a knife's edge, his voice carrying that particular tone of academic condescension that made the air feel thinner. Katie stood against the back wall, her tablet clutched in both hands, her scrub still bearing the coffee stain from the break room. She had barely slept. Let's discuss what happens when nurses decide protocol is optional, Whitfield began, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on her. Nurse Rodriguez apparently thinks her community college training trumps hospital protocol. Yesterday she inserted herself into a patient assignment explicitly outside her scope, wasting resources on a case with no insurance verification, no military transfer paperwork, no fiscal accountability. Katie's jaw clenched once. That was all. Her stylus continued moving across the tablet screen, recording vitals from the morning rounds as though he was discussing the weather forecast. The other residents shifted in their seats, their eyes flickering between her and Whitfield like spectators tracking a tennis match they couldn't fully understand. Perhaps at whatever online program granted her certification, they skipped the module on institutional liability, Whitfield continued, his words landing with the precision of someone who had rehearsed them. His eyes bore into her, searching, hunting for a flinch, a tremor, any evidence that his words had landed. Katie's hands remained steady. Her breathing unchanged. Her face a mask of professional neutrality. A resident in the second row snickered. It was meant to be quiet, but conference room B had the acoustics of a confessional, every sound carried, every whisper amplified. Katie heard it. She knew Whitfield heard it. The sound of institutional power finding its feet, its confidence growing. She continued charting. Oxygen saturation 96%. Blood pressure stable. Heart rate within normal limits. The numbers were the only truth in this room, and she focused on them with the intensity of someone reading scripture. If she looked up, if she met anyone's eyes, they would see something other than the woman Whitfield was describing. They would see something that frightened them. So she didn't look up. The rest of Grand Rounds continued in that same vein, a dissection of protocol, liability, institutional hierarchy, with Katie mentioned obliquely 3 more times, always as a cautionary tale. Always as an example of what happens when someone forgets their place in the hospital's ecosystem. The residents took notes. The attending physicians nodded. Whitfield's smile never wavered. When it ended, the residents filed out, most of them avoiding her eyes. 1 or 2 lingered, as though considering saying something, then thought better of it and followed the others into the hallway. Katie remained at the back wall for another minute, tablet still in her hands, charting information that had already been charted. The room smelled like coffee and anxiety and the particular staleness that came from a space where humans had gathered to witness something ugly. She breathed through her nose and then set the tablet down on the empty chair beside her. That afternoon, she found herself at the 3rd-floor vending machine, the one tucked in the corner near the supply closet where fewer people congregated. She needed something to do with her hands, some small task that didn't involve patience or charts or the weight of being watched. The vending machine hummed like it was keeping its own vital signs, and she pressed the button for black coffee, B7, watching the mechanical arm extend and rotate and drop the cup into the slot. 2 attendings stood 6 feet away, their voices pitched just slightly above the vending machine's hum, which meant they knew she was there and didn't care. "Did you see the girl playing nurse got her hand slapped?" one said. His name was Dr. Chen, the kind of attending who ordered residents around like they were still military personnel. "Community college hero complex," the other replied. That was Dr. Morrison, who had spent 15 years at Johns Hopkins and never let anyone forget it. "Whitfield's too nice. I'd have had her gone already." Katie's hand didn't waver as she retrieved the coffee cup. The plastic was still warm from whatever heated element lived inside the machine's mechanics. She lifted it to her lips, took a sip. The coffee was weak, the kind that hospitals served because they bought it in bulk and taste was secondary to volume, and turned to face them. Her eyes moved from Dr. Chen to Dr. Morrison and then past them, as though they were furniture, fixed obstacles in a hallway she needed to navigate. Dr. Chen's confidence faltered. Not much. Just enough that he turned back to the vending machine and pressed buttons for his own beverage. Katie walked toward the stairwell, her gait even, her posture aligned, her movements carrying the kind of economy that came from someone who had learned to occupy space without claiming it. But that wasn't the worst part. She had made it exactly 3 steps past the vending machine when she smelled cologne. Not the generic hospital soap and antiseptic variety, but something expensive, something that spoke of privilege and the assumption that the world existed to accommodate certain kinds of people. Dr. Whitfield materialized behind her so close that she could feel the pressure change, the air molecules rearranging themselves to make room for his presence. "Security will escort you out if you go near the major's room again," he whispered. His voice was low, meant for her ears only, but it carried the weight of a public announcement. "I've already documented your insubordination. One more instance, and your employment here ends. Permanently. And I'll make sure every hospital in the Southeast knows why." Katie stopped walking. She stood perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, she made a choice. She could feel her hands wanted to shake, not from fear, but from restraint, from the sheer effort of keeping every muscle fiber locked down and compliant. The trembling wasn't weakness. It was power held in check. She turned to face him. Met his eyes. Said nothing. What she didn't say hung in the air between them like humidity before a storm. What she didn't say was that she had carried a 50-pound child through 3 miles of enemy fire with a bullet in her own leg. What she didn't say was that she had held a tourniquet on her own femoral artery while waiting for extraction. What she didn't say was that she had done it all while remaining invisible, while disappearing into the kind of silence that only people trained in survival could achieve. Instead, she took another sip of her coffee and walked away, her posture unchanged, her face empty of everything except professional courtesy. Whitfield stood in the hallway, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a man who had expected a different response. He had wanted tears. He had wanted anger. He had wanted something he could point to and say, "See? Instability. Unreliability. This is why we can't have people like her in leadership positions." What he got instead was a nurse who walked away from conflict like it was a patient she had already discharged. The supply closet on the 3rd floor was exactly where it had always been, 3 doors down from the stairwell, marked with a laminated label that said, "Supplies, authorized personnel only." Katie let herself in and closed the door behind her. The fluorescent panel was broken, leaving the space in a kind of amber half-light that smelled like cardboard and plastic sheeting and the ghost of latex that had lingered here for months. She gripped the metal shelf with both hands. Her knuckles went white. Her breathing, which had been perfectly steady in front of Whitfield, suddenly came in short, sharp pulls, like she was running a race she couldn't see. She allowed herself 10 seconds of closed eyes and the kind of anger that only people who had survived combat could contain. 10 seconds. That was the allowance. Then her hands relaxed. Her breathing normalized. She opened her eyes and looked at the supplies around her, bandages, gauze, fur bags, all the small tools of healing stacked in neat rows. She had spent 20 years becoming invisible, had learned to fold herself into the background of other people's wars and other people's decisions. She had earned a rank that meant nothing outside military walls, had accumulated medals for things she couldn't discuss, had built a life on the foundation of keeping secrets so profound that speaking them aloud would violate federal law. And none of that mattered in this hospital, in this city, in this version of a life where a man with a pressed suit and a medical degree could erase her with words. But that wasn't true, was it? She left the supply closet and returned to the unit. Returned to charting. Returned to the careful work of being the nurse no one noticed, the one who existed in the spaces between other people's crises. She had done it in Helmand Province. She had done it in 7 other countries before that. She could do it here. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the major in the trauma bay had regained consciousness just enough to say her name. Just enough to describe the scar on the back of the woman who had pulled him from burning rubble 20 years ago. Just enough to trigger a phone call to a number that hadn't been used in 2 decades. And in exactly 34 hours, that phone call would become a cascade of events that would transform Seattle General into something Whitfield couldn't control, something that didn't respect protocols or paperwork or the fragile empire of lies he had constructed. But for now, Katie Rodriguez, Master Chief Petty Officer, invisibly carried her coffee back to the unit and returned to work. The clock on the break room wall ticked past 3:12 a.m. Katie watched it with the precision of someone who had learned to measure time in heartbeats. 3:23. 3:41. Each minute that passed was another increment of fluid accumulating around Marcus's heart, pericardial effusion building with the inevitability of rising water behind a failing dam. Untreated cardiac tamponade. She knew the numbers because she had studied them obsessively for the last 4 hours while pretending to chart vitals at the nurse's station. Fluid at current accumulation rate, approximately 150 milliliters every 60 minutes. Cardiac output declining proportionally. Systolic pressure dropping. The window for intervention narrowed with each tick of the second hand, and Whitfield knew it. That was the ugliness of what he was doing. He wasn't trying to save the hospital money anymore. He was letting a man die on purpose, betting that Marcus's body would do the work for him before Katie could act. She sat alone at the break room table, her coffee untouched, grown cold in its styrofoam cup. The fluorescent lights above hummed their endless mechanical song, a sound she had learned to filter out years ago in field hospitals where that same hum meant blood pressure cuffs and oxygen lines and the small miracle of staying alive 1 more hour. Through the reinforced glass of the break room window, she could see into the corridor beyond. At 3:33 a.m., Whitfield appeared, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man whose plans were crystallizing beautifully. He carried his leather briefcase, the expensive one from the Italian designer, the one he had mentioned cost more than a staff nurse's monthly salary. He walked past the break room without glancing in, but his phone was already at his ear. Katie watched his lips move. Watched him nod. Watched him smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the expression of someone closing a deal. Board member Patterson. That was her guess. 3 lucrative cardiac referral cases last quarter, each bringing $200,000 in billing. Patterson owed Whitfield, and Whitfield always collected his debts in exactly the right currency. By 4:15 a.m., the night supervisor entered the break room with a clipboard and an apologetic expression that meant nothing. Dr. Whitfield has requested you be formally removed from Major Webb's care team, the supervisor said, her voice careful and professional. Administrative review effective immediately. You'll remain here until your shift ends at 7, then report to HR. Katie looked up from her untouched coffee. She nodded once, her jaw tight but her eyes steady. The supervisor shifted her weight, waiting for something, a protest, a question, some indication that this was hitting its mark. Instead, Katie simply said, "Understood," and the supervisor left, the door closing with a soft pneumatic hiss. The silence that followed was a different kind of sound, the absence of air that comes after a blade falls. Katie had learned in Helmand Province that silence after an explosion often meant more danger was coming. She sat still and waited. At 4:24 a.m., through the break room window, she watched Whitfield leave the hospital. His car, a pearl-white Mercedes SUV with leather interior, because of course it was, pulled away from the parking circle and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. His shift was ending. He was going home to his expensive house with its pool and its granite countertops and its complete lack of the kind of clarity that comes from knowing what matters. Katie stood and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. The surface was cold. Outside, Savannah was still sleeping, the streets empty, the city holding its breath. She thought about the timeline. Thought about 20 years ago. Thought about an 8-year-old boy named Marcus Webb with screams that sounded like nothing human, like pain given a voice, like fear distilled into pure acoustic energy. She had carried him through burning buildings and across open ground where bullets were coming from 3 directions and the night sky was bright with tracer fire. 3 miles. That's what the after-action report had said, though the numbers in official documents never captured the weight of it, never captured the feeling of a child's fingernails digging through your uniform into the tissue underneath, never captured the moment when you realized you were the only thing between this specific 8-year-old and the end of his story. Katie returned to her locker and opened it. The combat boot sat on the bottom shelf, underneath her spare scrubs and her civilian clothes. They were worn through the heel, the leather cracked from 20 years of storage in a locker at a hospital where nobody knew what they represented. She picked them up and held them for exactly 7 seconds. Then she placed them back on the shelf with the same precision she would use to lay out surgical instruments. At 4:51 a.m., she checked her watch and calculated Marcus had been without intervention for 147 minutes. The fluid around his heart was now accumulating faster as the cardiac output decreased, which increased the intrapericardial pressure, which decreased the cardiac output further in a spiral that only accelerated toward arrest. 2 hours and 27 minutes since Whitfield had ordered the ER staff to maintain distance. 2 hours and 27 minutes since Katie had watched the algorithms of institutional cowardice trump the algorithms of medical necessity. She did the math again. 37 milliliters per minute now, not 30. The pressure was building exponentially. Marcus was dying on a mathematical trajectory that nobody was even pretending to interrupt anymore. She left the break room and walked through the empty corridors of Seattle General in Savannah, Georgia. The hospital at 4:52 a.m. was a different organism than it was during daylight. The bright, managed world of protocols and hierarchies and careful chains of command dissolved into something more primal, just a building full of people dying and the machines that were trying to prevent it. She passed the nurse's station on the 4th floor. Unattended. She passed the supply room. The door clicked open with her badge, and she stepped inside. The shelves were organized with military precision, each item in its place. A 14-gauge angiocath needle. A 36 French chest tube kit. Pericardiocentesis equipment. She selected what she would need and placed the items carefully into the pocket of her scrubs, feeling the weight of them distribute across her chest like the weight of a decision that couldn't be unmade. The supply room door closed behind her with a soft whisper of pneumatic sealing. At 5:04 a.m., Katie stood in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, listening to her own breathing. She had learned in a compound in Helmand Province with her unit designation emblazoned on a patch she hadn't been allowed to wear outside the walls that breathing is a choice. Fear tries to take it from you. Pressure tries to restrict it. Institutional cowardice tries to smother it. But breathing, actual deliberate breathing, is something you control. She breathed in for a count of 4. Held it for a count of 4. Exhaled for a count of 4. The tactic worked the same way it had worked in 2004. It worked the same way it had worked in 2008, 2011, 2014, 2016. The year didn't matter. The mechanism was unchanged. You take control of the one thing the world can't take from you, and then you move. The night shift supervisor had gone home at 3:22 a.m., and the replacement supervisor was charting in the office, his attention on paperwork instead of the monitors. The hospital security system wasn't paranoid at 5:08 a.m. because nobody expected a nurse to suddenly become a security threat at 5 in the morning. Katie moved through the ICU with the kind of smoothness that comes from knowing exactly where each camera was positioned and exactly how many seconds of blind spots existed between them. 18 years of understanding hospital infrastructure. 18 years of knowing that most surveillance focused on entrances and exits, not internal movement. She had pulled the fire alarms twice in training. She knew the layout. She understood the angles. At 5:10 a.m., she stood in front of Marcus Webb's room. The door was unlocked. Nothing was locked. Security theater meant nobody was actually guarding anything. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that nobody heard because nobody was paying attention to Major Webb, who had been deemed an unsavable administrative problem rather than a human being whose heart was literally drowning in fluid. The monitor showed what she had expected: oxygen saturation at 88% and falling, heart rate 142 and climbing, blood pressure collapsing into the 80s over 50s. He was coding in slow motion. He was dying with the precision of someone whose insurance paperwork hadn't been filed. Katie moved to the bedside, and Marcus's eyes opened. They were the same eyes that had looked at her from a burning room 20 years ago, but they were different now because he was older and because he recognized something in her face that his conscious mind didn't have the context to understand. She pressed a single finger to her lips. "Don't speak. Don't alert anyone. Help is here now," the gesture said. She had become invisible so many years ago that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, but Marcus Webb saw her anyway. His eyes filled with tears, and he understood something that his conscious mind still couldn't articulate. Some part of him knew. Katie reached into her scrub pocket. The supplies she had drawn from the supply room were arranged in the precise order she would need them. She had performed pericardiocentesis exactly 7 times in her career, each time under battlefield conditions, each time with medical helicopters inbound and mortar fire reaching for the building. This was different. This was in a hospital with anesthesia available and sterile fields and all the infrastructure of modern medicine. This was easier. This was also going to end her career. She found the 5th intercostal space, marked it with her fingertip, prepared the insertion site. In field hospitals, time moved differently. You didn't feel the weight of it or the pressure of consequence. You just moved your hands and trusted that your training would carry you through. She had learned to be invisible so completely that even her own actions seemed to happen separately from her consciousness. The needle went in. Her hands moved on their own, muscle memory and 10,000 hours of training and the knowledge that Marcus Webb was 17 seconds away from cardiac arrest without intervention. The hiss of air escaping from the pericardial space filled the silence like the sound of pressure finally releasing. She watched the fluid drain, clear and tinged with blood, the accumulation that had been choking his heart now flowing away into the catch chamber she had positioned beneath the needle. O2 climbing, 88, 91, 94, 97. Heart rate dropping from 142, falling, 128, 115, 102, 95. Blood pressure rising as the heart suddenly had room to function again, 80 over 50, 85 over 55, 92 over 62. Sinus rhythm. Normal sinus rhythm. Marcus was stable. Alive. His eyes closed, and his breathing deepened as the immediate threat passed, as the emergency that nobody else had been willing to touch finally resolved itself because Katie Rodriguez had decided that her invisibility was not more important than his life. She had made a choice 20 years ago to carry an 8-year-old boy through enemy fire. She was making another choice now, fully aware that this one would destroy everything she had built in the years since. 5:03 in the morning, and the supply closet smelled like antiseptic and rubber tubing. Katie's hands moved with the precision of someone who had performed this motion 1,000 times before, not in a supply closet, but in the dark, under mortar fire, with instruments held together by prayer and muscle memory. The 14-gauge angiocath needle was exactly where she'd positioned it 3 weeks ago, buried beneath rolls of elastic bandage and for tubing that no one would miss. The chest tube kit lay flat against her ribs under her scrubs top, her body heat already warming the sealed packaging. The night shift was skeleton crew. 30 nurses covering 400 beds. The attending physician dozed in the conference room, his head resting on a stack of charts. The residents had gone home at 11. Security made rounds every 40 minutes, and Katie had timed the pattern twice. Dale came by the ER entrance at 5:16 and not again until 5:58. A 52-minute window. Enough. She moved through the corridor like a woman walking to check on any patient. No urgency. No fear. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst the world had to offer. Dale was at the security desk, watching 3 monitors that showed empty hallways. He didn't look up as she passed. Marcus Webb's room sat at the far end of the trauma wing, the door half closed, his monitor casting a pale blue glow into the hallway. His heart rate was 147. His blood pressure was 71/38. His breathing had become shallow, almost gasping. The pericardial sac around his heart was filling faster now, the pressure building with each passing minute, squeezing the chambers like a fist closing around something fragile and dying. Katie opened the door. She didn't knock. "He's crashing," she said quietly, looking at Dale as she slipped inside. "His pressure's in free fall." Dale looked at the monitor. Looked at Marcus's pale face. Looked back at Katie. He stepped aside. The room door clicked shut. No lock, hospital rooms never locked from inside. Katie had 90 seconds maximum before anyone might notice, and if they asked questions, she would already be history anyway. The choice had been made at 5:10 a.m. in the supply closet. Everything after this was just momentum. She unwrapped the chest tube kit with one hand while her other hand prepared the surgical site, swabbing Marcus's lower left chest with chlorhexidine in swift, even strokes. No time for full sterile draping. Combat medicine was about speed and pressure relief, not aesthetics. The needle advanced through the skin, she felt the subtle give of muscle, then the sudden release as it pierced the pericardial membrane. Her hands were steady as a surgical laser. 60 milliliters of blood came back into the syringe immediately. Dark and slick and promising. Marcus's oxygen saturation climbed from 74 to 81 to 88. His heart rate dropped from 147 to 132 to 119. The pressure relieved, the chambers resumed their work, the organ at the center of his chest remembering how to beat without suffocation. Katie taped the chest tube in place, secured the drainage bag, and checked his vitals again. Sinus rhythm. Normal respiratory rate. The color was already returning to his face, a flush of pink at the cheekbones that wasn't sepsis or fever, just oxygen finally reaching capillaries again. "You're okay," she said quietly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Just rest." She didn't leave the room. She stayed. 6 hours. 237 minutes. She stayed because the fluid would reaccumulate. It always did. The pericardium would fill again and again, each time pushing Marcus closer to that cliff edge, and every time it did, Katie was there with the needle, her hands moving through the same motion she'd performed in godforsaken valleys where the heat rose off the ground in shimmering waves and people died for lack of exactly this kind of intervention. 40 minutes. That was the cycle. 40 minutes and the pressure would build to dangerous levels again. She watched his monitor like she was watching enemy positions through a rifle scope. At 5:44 a.m., the pressure returned. At 6:24 a.m., again. At 7:04 a.m., again. At 7:44 a.m., again. Each time she drew blood, each time his vitals improved, each time she sat back in the chair beside his bed with her hand still steady and her breathing still even. At 6:34 a.m., Marcus opened his eyes. His pupils tracked to Katie's face and his voice came out hoarse, fractured. You were in Helmand. You pulled me from." "Later," Katie said, pressing her hand against his shoulder. "Rest now." He fell back into semi-consciousness, his body understanding what his mind couldn't fully process. The woman sitting beside him was not a memory. The hands that had saved him at age 8 had just saved him again at 38. Some ghosts, he would later understand, don't haunt you. They protect you. They wait. At 11:03 a.m., Dr. Whitfield returned to the hospital. He stopped at the nursing station first, checking the overnight report. Cardiac tamponade, critical. Major Marcus Webb, Special Forces. Vital stable. Chest tube in place. He felt his stomach compress into itself, a knot of panic and rage coexisting perfectly. He walked to Marcus's room. He looked at the vitals board. He looked at Katie sitting in the bedside chair, still in her scrubs, her hands folded in her lap. He looked at the chest tube kit on the crash cart, the packaging torn open, the needle casing discarded in the biohazard bin. For 3 full seconds, Whitfield's face remained blank. Then the red came. Not a blush. Not embarrassment. Pure, primal rage, the kind that comes when someone has just destroyed everything you've carefully built. "Out," he said to Katie. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Katie stood. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply walked past him and out of the room, her composure intact, her eyes forward. Whitfield grabbed the security phone on the wall. "I need footage from cameras 4 and 6, starting at 5:19 a.m. Now." By 11:13 a.m., he had everything he needed. Katie in the supply closet at 5:03 a.m. Katie entering Marcus's room at 5:10 a.m. Katie performing an unauthorized medical procedure on a patient she'd been explicitly forbidden to treat. A violation of protocol. A breach of every boundary he'd established. Security escorted Katie to the women's locker room at exactly 11:52 a.m. No explanation. No hearing. No chance to speak. Just the security officer, a kind man named Patterson who avoided her eyes, and the knowledge that in 30 seconds, everything she'd built in 8 months was about to become nothing. Katie stood at her locker and pulled out her scrubs. She had 4 changes, all folded neatly. She began the ritual of removal, removing each set from its hook and folding it carefully, precisely, the way you fold a flag at a military funeral. Each sleeve creased into a perfect angle. Each garment reduced to a compact rectangle. This was the humiliation that burned worse than any firefight, not the loss of the job, but the surrender of it. In combat, you fought back. You had agency. You could shoot, move, communicate, win. Here, there was nothing but the quiet devastation of surrender. Her ID badge went on top of the folded scrubs. Her fingertips brushed the worn combat boots at the bottom of her locker, Marcus's boots, the ones he'd been wearing when the helicopter brought him in. Katie had kept them, a relic, a touchstone, a reminder of why she'd kept moving through 20 years of quiet survival. She didn't take them. This wasn't the moment for ghosts to step forward. This was the moment for them to stay buried, for Katie to be simply what everyone believed her to be, just a nurse, just someone who'd violated protocol, just someone who'd made a mistake that cost her everything. She closed the locker door. The sound was sharp and final, metal against metal, a small violence in an empty room. At 1:17 p.m., Whitfield sent a hospital-wide email from his office, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the precision of someone executing a plan, effective immediately. All staff must review Section 4.7 of our patient assignment protocol. Patient care assignments cannot be reassigned without direct supervisor approval. Violations will result in immediate termination. We are committed to maintaining the highest professional standards at Seattle General. Dr. Richard Whitfield, Chief of Surgery. 17 people received that email. They read between the lines instantly. The nurse who'd saved the Special Forces major had just been executed. The message was, "Stay in line, or this happens to you." At 5:51 p.m., Whitfield called the hospital's communications director and confirmed the details for the evening press conference. 7 o'clock sharp. Ballroom on the 2nd floor. Light refreshments. The message he planned to deliver was simple: hospital protocol exists to protect patients, and at Seattle General, protocol was sacred. He would make his stand. He would defend his empire. What he didn't know was that at 6:04 p.m., the sky above Seattle General would fracture with rotor wash. What he didn't know was that 2 Black Hawks were already descending toward the parking circle, their shadows falling across the building like a predator's wings folding inward before the strike. What he didn't know was that the name Reaper, a name that had been whispered by Navy officers in classified briefings, a call sign that appeared in files marked Eyes Only Jock Command, a ghost that had been deliberately erased from the record, was about to walk back through the front doors of Seattle General in full daylight, in front of his entire hospital staff, and that his carefully constructed world was precisely 322 seconds away from total annihilation. The television in the hospital lobby, the one always muted, tuned to a news feed, would soon switch to something far more immediate, the live capture of a moment that would define careers, end others, and prove once and for all that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding everyone else's life in her hands. Dr. Whitfield sat in his office at 7:47 a.m., his desk arranged with the precision of a general preparing a campaign. The phone in his hand felt warm, almost living. He had favors owed to him, real ones, not the transactional kind. 3 board members had sent their children through his referral network to specialists he controlled, prestigious surgeons, diagnostic centers that moved mountains for his recommendations. Those relationships had currency. They had teeth. He dialed board member Patterson first. Patterson answered on the second ring, the sound of coffee being sipped, a morning routine interrupted. Whitfield didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We have a serious problem. A nurse, Rodriguez, violated direct patient assignment protocols and contaminated a case file with unauthorized procedures. I need documentation of her insubordination before she tries to claim I'm the one acting outside policy." Patterson's hesitation lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, "You've never steered us wrong, James." "What do you need?" Whitfield explained. Patterson said he'd speak to the other board members. They owed him more than one favor. The calls to Katie's previous hospital took 90 minutes. Whitfield pulled her references from the system: 2 nurses, 1 supervisor at a facility in Tacoma, 8 hours north. He reached them during shift change, when voices are tired and guards are low. "I'm calling regarding Katie Rodriguez, who we're considering for a sensitive supervisory role," he lied, his tone carrying the weight of institutional authority. "I need your candid assessment of her judgment, particularly regarding protocol compliance and rule following." The first reference was non-committal. The second one, Supervisor Chen, hesitated, then offered something valuable without knowing she was doing so. Katie was always independent. Strong instincts, but sometimes she'd interpret policy loosely. Whitfield thanked her, and the seed was planted. Those references would circle back. They always did. By 9 a.m., he had made the call that would seal everything. Dr. Marcus Henley, his former intern, now heading quality assurance at a private consulting firm, answered on the first ring. "I need documentation on a protocol violation," Whitfield said. "My former intern, I'm sure you could spare the time." Henley arrived by 1 p.m. with a file, his pen ready, his eyes already scanning the security footage Whitfield had provided. Henley was competent, which made him dangerous in the right way. He didn't need to be told what the narrative should be. He saw what Whitfield needed him to see: a nurse operating outside her scope, performing procedures without authorization, contaminating a patient record. By 3 p.m., Henley's formal report was sitting on Whitfield's desk, each violation meticulously documented, each timestamp precise, each observation positioned to suggest reckless endangerment disguised as compassion. Whitfield had built his empire on the understanding that institutions move slowly, but they move with the weight of gravity. He had 3 hours before the press conference. 3 hours to position himself as the defender of protocol, the guardian of standards, the doctor who put institutional integrity above emotional decision-making. The narrative was already written. The dominoes were already falling. Then the rotor wash hit. The sound came first, a percussion so deep it lived in the chest cavity, in the place where fear and recognition live as neighbors. The windows of Seattle General's entrance corridor rattled in their frames like teeth chattering. Whitfield's office was on the 7th floor, but the vibration traveled through the building's bones. He stood, walking to his window, and what he saw made his blood pressure jump 17 points. 2 UH-60M Black Hawk helicopters descended into the parking circle with the grace of falling anvils, their rotors beating the air into submission, their landing skids kissing the concrete with the precision of operators who had done this 1,000 times. The hospital's public address system crackled with confusion, not a medical code, not a security alert, something else entirely, something that made the ER director's voice shake when she announced, "All clear perimeter. Aircraft operations, parking circle only. Repeat, all clear." Whitfield's throat tightened. The automatic doors of Seattle General's main entrance opened, and 12 Navy SEALs entered in formation, not tactical formation, ceremonial formation. Combat dress uniforms, pressed and immaculate, chevrons catching the fluorescent light. The lobby fell silent. Patients in wheelchairs stopped moving. A woman in scrubs holding a coffee cup froze mid-sip. The SEAL's boots on the tile floor produced a sound like a clock ticking down, each step in perfect synchronization, echoing through the entrance corridor with the acoustic weight of a weapon. A chief petty officer stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to commanding rooms and oceans. "We are looking for Reaper." He said it like a prayer. Like a name that had been waiting 20 years to be spoken aloud again. Master Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez. "She's here. She's on staff." The lobby was 63 people large. 63 people who had never heard that name, that call sign, that designation that belonged to shadows and classified briefings and operations so compartmentalized that even the hospital's own security system had no record of her real service history. The CPO moved his eyes across the room, and every face shifted, suddenly trying to remember, do I know a Katie Rodriguez? Have I seen her? What did she look like? A Navy two-star general appeared then, stepping through the doorway with the bearing of a man who had reviewed casualty statistics at sunrise and gone back to sleep. His dress whites carried the weight of command, his chest a geography of medals arranged by prestige. He held a leather portfolio, and when he opened it, his voice reached the back corner of the lobby where the vending machines hummed in ignorant oblivion. Master Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, the general announced. Navy Cross. Silver Star. Silver Star. Silver Star. 17 confirmed combat saves in Helmand Province between 2003 and 2007. Commendation for Valor. Purple Heart, twice wounded. Reclassified as deceased in official records following operational compromise. 16 medals for merit and service. The silence in the lobby achieved a quality of weight that seemed physical. Then Marcus Webb appeared, wheeled by an orderly whose hand shook slightly as he pushed the wheelchair. Marcus's torso was wrapped in compression dressing, his color still chalky from blood loss, but his eyes were clear and burning with something like rage. He raised his hand, and the orderly stopped. Marcus spoke into that silence with the force of testimony. This woman took shrapnel meant for me when I was 8 years old. I was a child in Helmand Province. There was fire. There were American soldiers shooting. I was terrified. And this woman, Marcus pointed, his arm steady, his voice cracking only once, she came under fire, she picked me up, and she carried me 3 miles through active combat with a bullet in her leg. My scars are healing. Her scars are still there. You can see them. I still have my life because of her. The room had stopped breathing. Katie Rodriguez appeared then, not from a hallway or an office, no one ever saw her enter, she was simply there, standing beside the wall where the hospital directory hung, and everyone's eyes snapped toward her simultaneously. She wore her scrubs, her badge still clipped to her pocket, her hair pulled back with the severity of someone who had learned to look professional in adverse conditions. Her composure was absolute. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't flush. She simply looked at the chief petty officer and gave a single-minute nod. Dr. Whitfield stood at the reception desk, his press conference speech printed and sitting in a folder on his desk upstairs, his media coordinator checking equipment on the 4th floor. He had positioned himself perfectly to catch a glimpse of the ceremony. His face had drained of color with the efficiency of a bathtub pulling water. He watched Katie Rodriguez step forward and salute, her hand coming up with the precision of a rifle bolt closing, and he watched the Navy SEALs return it with synchronized perfection. He watched the general shake her hand. He watched Marcus Webb reach out and grip her arm like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. And he watched a resident, a young man named Torres, an intern who had been present during the Grand Round's humiliation, pull out his phone and record it all. Every second. Every salute. Every revelation. By 6:47 p.m., the video had uploaded to 17 platforms. The title appeared first on the hospital staff Facebook page, then Twitter, then YouTube. Doctor fires decorated war hero for saving patient's life. The view counter moved like a slot machine stuck on jackpot. 7,000 views. 16,000. 40,000. By 7:30 p.m., #Dr. Whitfield was trending. By 9:15 p.m., the hashtag had become a wildfire. Articles were being written. News anchors were reviewing the footage. Former military officers were going on record, "This is what true heroism looks like." Medical ethicists were being interviewed. The institutional pressure to deny care based on payment is the moral failure here, not the nurse's intervention. Katie's name and her accomplishments were being cross-referenced with military databases. Her classified operations were being discussed on public forums. The careful erasure, the deliberate removal from official records that had protected her for 2 decades, was being systematically undone by tens of thousands of people who thought they were just sharing a good story about an injustice. Dr. Whitfield cancelled his press conference at 8:42 p.m. He sat in his office with the lights off, watching the comments scroll past on his phone. Someone had done the math. His billing records, cross-referenced with publicly available incident reports, suggested patterns. Upcoded procedures. Fraudulent diagnostic codes. Patients billed for services never rendered. The accusations were already being made on the internet. The investigations were already being requested. His medical school mentor, Dr. Patricia Okafor, a legend in cardiothoracic surgery, the woman who had written his residency recommendation 2 decades ago, saw the video at midnight. By 12:47 a.m., she sent an email to the Seattle General Board of Directors. One sentence: "I disavow Dr. Whitfield's training under my supervision and demand immediate investigation into his clinical judgment and institutional conduct." The hospital board convened an emergency session at 6 a.m. They reviewed the security footage he had provided, and board member Patterson, the one who owed him so many favors, realized the timestamps showed Whitfield had abandoned Marcus Webb without intervention for over 2 hours despite documented cardiac tamponade. Board member Chen pulled billing records and found 17 months of fraud. By noon, the board suspended him pending criminal investigation. Whitfield sat at home, on a kitchen chair he couldn't remember purchasing, and listened to his medical school prestige evaporate like rain on hot asphalt. Johns Hopkins removed his name from their alumni recognition wall. Medical journals requested he withdraw as a peer reviewer. His malpractice insurance carrier announced non-renewal. His carefully constructed empire, the one built on referrals and favors and institutional authority, was collapsing in real time, dismantled by his own security footage, his own fraudulent billing records, his own underestimation of a woman he had tried to erase. And Katie Rodriguez, 6 hours after the SEALs arrived, accepted the position of director of Seattle General's new veteran trauma program with a handshake and no press statement. She walked to her new office on the 4th floor, the window overlooking the emergency bay where Marcus Webb had arrived with shrapnel still embedded in his chest. She sat at her desk, and on it she placed a pair of worn combat boots, size 6, still stained dark near the ankle, Marcus's boots from that night. The left one bore a scuff from the helicopter floor. She had kept them without asking why. The wall behind her desk was bare, ready for the citations she would finally be allowed to display. This is what happens when the quiet person in the room has been waiting 20 years for the right moment. This is what justice looks like when it arrives with rotor wash and navy whites and the voice of a man saying his savior's name aloud for the first time in 2 decades. If you believe in recognizing hidden heroism, recognizing the sacrifices people make in silence, subscribe to this channel. Like this video if Katie Rodriguez's story moved you. And comment, what would you have done in Katie's position?